My friends, thank you so much for your invitation to participate in this conference. I think it's a highly important event. I'm sorry that I cannot be with you in person, and I respect and appreciate that you've allowed me to deliver this short video. Friends, if you'll allow me, I would like to display an image for you. This is a painting by the Irish artist Brian Maguire. Brian Maguire spent a considerable period along the shores of the Mediterranean a few short years ago, absolutely appalled by what he saw and he experienced. The sense of these countless unnecessary losses of life, but anonymized, where it was no longer individuals who died so tragically, it was the numbers of those who died, and the individuals somehow got forgotten. And that's why he did this painting. He did it of one individual. It's not any particular person, but it's of one individual floating in the sea, and somehow through that painting restoring the dignity of each individual who died so tragically and so unnecessarily. He brought back to mind for me some very personal memories. For instance, when back in 2016, I first went to the Greek islands and I saw those mounds of fake life vests cast aside, which had proved to be truly useless. And again, it was in the mound, that sense that it wasn't about individual humans anymore. It was just somehow about the vulgar quantity of those who had passed away. Or I think of the meetings I had in recent weeks with survivors of the Adriana shipwreck off the coast of Greece, where they spoke so passionately about their friends, their cousins, their brothers who had died so unnecessarily in that appalling tragedy. Again, it was about people, not about numbers. This is a context for my great belief in what you're discussing here in this conference. For instance, the importance of identifying each and every person who died, giving them back the dignity of having a name. And I call on all states to invest heavily in the resources, because it's not cheap, in the forensics and everything else that's required to be able to deliver this goal for at least some of those who have died. I also see the value of your discussion of the continued need for an investment in the tracing of those who are missing. And it's in this context, by the way, that I think as much of those missing on land as on sea. I think of those children who have disappeared across Europe quite needlessly and who need to be traced, found, brought back into the loved embrace of family or carers. In this context, I strongly endorse the idea of central focal points in each country. This is critical, a single gathering place for all of the necessary information so that those who need it, including family and loved ones, have somewhere to go. Now, I also see a huge importance of prevention. It's not just about fixing things when they, not fixing, but it's not about just addressing things when they go so very badly wrong. It's about preventing it in the first place. I think of search and rescue at sea. It is simply unacceptable the extent to which there is inadequate search and rescue capacity in our seas, including in the Mediterranean. It's no less unacceptable that some countries are investing more heavily in the effort to undertake search and rescue. It's a clear matter of law. It's a matter of international human rights law, but even of the law of the sea. And we have to call on member states to honour their solemn legal commitments to take every necessary action to save life at sea. Of course, it's more than just saving life at sea. It's also what happens to people when they reach the shore. We need safe and legal pathways for people to reach our shores, for humanitarian and for other reasons, and we also need decent reception conditions. Many people who disappear from reception facilities do so because they're overcrowded, do so because they're inhumane, do so because even their health is put at risk by that facility. We lose so many children because we don't have a child-specific and child-respectful reception and welcomes. So there's so much to do, there's so much for you to discuss. I look forward very much to continuing to engage with you, to support you, and to partner with you in the vital work. And please, if you'll allow me to conclude by returning to that image of Brian Maguire. I hope the image has not caused any upset today. I realise how it could trigger something for any of you, and that's certainly not my intention. My intention with this image is actually to speak to people like me, people with responsibility to do something, and to remind me and us of our need to be shocked, to engage, to put all of our effort into resolution, and then to go into a better future hand in hand with survivors, relatives and loved ones of those missing and lost, so that we eradicate this problem from our continent. Thank you.
Well, even though he's not here, I want to thank Michael O'Flaherty, who's been a great supporter both of the report and the recommendation, but generally for the cause of protecting the rights of people on the move, for the right to be identified, and he has been a great supporter along the way until this point. So even though he's not here, I will also convey this to him personally. And with this, welcome back on this morning to this conference. I'm very happy to see you all again, and I had the impression that after the family picture yesterday, it became a bit like a family last night when small groups were going out and people were chatting down in the hall. And there is a great need for exchange, for which we also want to provide the room. And I'm very happy for everyone to be here and make use of this and to expand this network. We're now starting with the second part, which is consisting of 4 round table, even though it is a straight table, but imagine it is round. And for this presentation, it's important to note that they will be recorded. So the presentation itself will be on tape, but not the Q&A. So whenever someone wants to speak up afterwards, it will not be available to the public, and we can have a frank and open conversation. I want to welcome for the first roundtable Tanya Delabarde, who's working as an anthropologist at the Forensic Medical Institute in Paris, and for over 10 years she contributed to the examination and identification of victims of the conflict in the Balkans for the UN and the International Criminal Tribunal Court for the former Yugoslavia, and she has also worked closely together with the ICRC. Next, I want to welcome Dr. Maurice Titball-Binns, appointed UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary execution. He is holding this post since April 2021, and he's a medical doctor specialized in forensic science, human rights, and humanitarian action. And over the past 40 years, he has conducted fact-finding, technical assessment, and capacity building to over 80 countries in the world. That's an impressive number. And third, I want to welcome Salvatore Vella, the Chief Prosecutor of the GILA Public Prosecutor's Office in Italy. And he is not just fighting against the facilitation of irregular immigration in the Mediterranean, but he's also coordinating one of the most important investigations related to the island of Lampedusa in the last years. And even though this has nothing to do with the conference today, he also was involved in numerous investigations against the mafia organization Cosa Nostra, which is an interesting topic for another day. Thank you all for being here. And I will first give the... Oh, and now he's there, sorry. And now we are also being joined by Panayotis Maniatis, the public prosecutor who's currently serving in the public prosecutor's office at the Court of First Instance of Athens, and he has a 20-year practical experience in the prosecutor's service. And he was involved with Eurojust, the European Union, the Council of Europe, and the United Nations, and he has dealt with smuggling of migrants and trafficking of human being cases at national and international level for the last 10 years. Also welcome to this table. And we will first start with Tanja de la Barthe. Oh, sorry? With Morris? Okay, then I have the wrong order. Then I will give the floor to you, Morris. Okay.
Thank you. First of all, to the organizers of this groundbreaking conference for the invitation to be part of the panel. Thank you, Julian, for all your hard work and sincere congratulations. I mean, you should be proud for what you have achieved and for what the Council of Europe now stands through the Parliamentary Assembly adoption of your report, resolution and recommendations. Sincere congratulations. Most of what I have to say has already been said yesterday and by the Honourable first speaker this morning. So I will try to sort of summarize a few concepts and ideas to add to this in what I hope may be a constructive way forward to address what has been rightly defined as a humanitarian tragedy, but which I consider to be a scandal, both political and especially legal, in terms of violations of duties and responsibilities of states to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to life. With regards to tens of thousands of migrants who die on their way to reach this continent and elsewhere in the world, and who, for the most part, remain lost, and when found, mostly unidentified. And I have, on this respect, building up from the reports on the extrajudicial summary or arbitrary execution of migrants, which my predecessor Agnès Calamar published in 2017 and presented to the GA, and many other documents that have been produced since, including the opinion of the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, among many others. I have one proposition to make for the Council of Europe, and especially for the member states, which is that the identification and dignified management of unidentified dissidents, including migrants, should not be an obligation of means, but instead must become an obligation of results. Obligations of means imposed on a state the duty to do the best they can to achieve a specific goal, but without the guarantee that this goal will be reached. And to some extent, on a discretionary basis. By contrast, obligations of result require a state to guarantee the achievement of the prescribed result and otherwise justify why it wasn't achieved. The reason behind this proposition is simple. Unlike 25 or 30 more years ago, today forensic science, together with the timely and effective protocol activation, such as Interpol's disaster victim identification and international cooperation makes it possible to reliably identify dead bodies and human remains even when highly fragmented, decomposed, and in large numbers. For example, Air France Flight 447 which went down on the 1st of June 2009 off international waters of Brazil on the flight back from Rio to Paris, crashed in the Atlantic with 228 people on board dead. Of those victims, 204 were recovered and all identified by June 2011. And this wreckage had to be recovered, first found and then recovered from nearly 4,000 meters below surface. A huge operation which involved rescue efforts from Senegal, from Brazil, from Cabo Verde, and dozens of other countries as well who joined in to make this result possible. MH17, shot down on the 17th of July 2014 with a surface-to-air Buk missile shot by Russian support forces in eastern Ukraine. 298 on board dead, of whom 296 were recovered in the following month. I was involved in part of that operation. And by December 2014, 296 were fully identified. Again, a multi-nation effort to search for, recover, and identify those dead. By contrast, more than 90% of those who die in shipwrecks and other circumstances in the Mediterranean and elsewhere in Europe trying to reach this continent remain unrecovered, and most are never identified. And I think it's important to remember here, or remind ourselves, it's a very basic thing, but a body without a name is a person who is missing for their loved ones. And in the large majority of these cases, there is a family behind, looking for that individual, suffering, as we heard yesterday, for not knowing the fate. So, today we can, with will, with resources and commitment, recover and identify the vast majority of these people. So my recommendation today, an urgent call to the Committee of Ministers and Member States of the Council of Europe, is to implement Parliamentary Assembly Recommendation 2284 along the lines of Resolution 2569 and on the basis of the report that we just mentioned. In particular, with regards to forensic human identification, operational paragraph 3 of the recommendation 2284. Also, in addition, I believe it's urgent for states to ensure that the medical legal death investigation systems everywhere are working up to standards. Again, this is not an option, this is an obligation. And it's not only about missing migrants. We witnessed with COVID-19 how many loved persons ended up misidentified or buried without a name for lack of that capacity, for common standards, for improved methods, for resources. And it is possible. This is not an option, it is an obligation. And the standards are there. Rule 99 on the harmonization of autopsies, which actually the recommendation calls for updating. I must say, good news, this has already been updated by the European Council of Legal and Forensic Medicine in 2014. So it's just adopting the updated recommendation. But also this document here, the Minnesota Protocol on the investigation of potentially unlawful death. Every one and single of these deaths is potentially unlawful. And a failure to investigate a potentially unlawful death may amount to violation of the right to life according to international human rights law. Again, this is not an option, it's an obligation. To conclude, and in summary, improving the identification and ensuring the dignified management of all the dead, including dissident migrants, is not an option but an obligation, and this will help resolve, at least to some extent, the tragedy of unidentified dissidents, including migrants, and the scandal of unidentified dissidents. It will also help improve the administration of justice, the rule of law, and ensure fulfillment with international legal obligations and humanitarian duties. Finally, on a slightly different note, and as a source of inspiration, I invite you all, if and when you have a chance to visit Milan, not to miss visiting the museum which Professor Cristina Catania, who will speak later, helped build in Milan on forensic medicine, forensic anthropology, human rights, and humanitarian action. It is an incredible museum, both informative and inspirational, on all these matters, which actually helps remind us that everything that needs to be done is clearly defined and the know-how is there. Now we have to put it into action. And I offer the assistance of my mandate and my own personal assistance as a forensic expert to help make this possible, including in cooperation with the Council of Europe, with the Parliamentary Assembly. We have already worked together on some of this with Julian, and I'm very proud of that. And I also have the honor and pleasure of having a group of world-renowned forensic experts who I have invited as a forensic advisory group for my mandate, 4 of whom are here, including Tania de la Barde, Cristina Catania, Mercedes Salado, and José Luis Prieto here. And I'm sure they will all be very, very keen and ready to assist on your efforts. Finally, and last but not least, nada sin las familias. That's a saying in Latin America, where I come from, nothing without the families. I learned my human rights working with the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, who actually pioneered forensic sciences to find and identify their missing grandchildren. Without the families, we can't identify a body in most cases. So they are a fundamental component of this search. It was said yesterday, but it's not only about nice words, it's about a necessity and their rights. Thank you very much.
He will speak directly in English, and I will translate all of the questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Morris, also for this proposal that is putting the whole topic on into a larger format, and your proposition is to make the identification an obligation of the state, which would not just be beneficial to the identification of missing migrants, but every person that is dead and identified somewhere, and which might also take the provocation for some out of this topic, and ultimately also would help to fulfill a larger goal, and that is to identify people that died and to not leave anyone identified. Thank you very much for this. We'll now give the floor to Salvatore Vella, and just in case you wonder, we have Sarah here on the podium as well for the purpose of translation, but we'll do that afterwards with the questions. Mr. Vella, please.
Thank you. Si vede?
Lo vedi da davanti adesso. Voilà.
Ok. Okay, thank you. I grew up in a Sicilian city, Mazara del Vallo, whose historic center continues to be called the Casbah, because the most important period of its history was the 2 centuries of Arabian domination that began in 827. I have been working in Sicily as a public prosecutor for about 25 years. And since 2004, I have also been involved in criminal investigation related to irregular immigration to the central Mediterranean route. Over the last 20 years, I have seen the type of boats used by migrants to cross the Strait of Sicily change. They have become increasingly unstable and dangerous. Initially, they were real boats, safe, capable of navigating the Strait of Sicily, which remains a dangerous sea, even if it's not an ocean. Gradually, the migrants' boats have become floating coffins, prone to capsizing even with the flat seas and no wind. Over the last 20 years, I have seen the routes change. Initially, landing occurred on the Sicilian coast, easily reached by the first Tunisian or Egyptian smugglers. Gradually, the routes have concentrated towards the island of Lampedusa, which is at 118 nautical miles from the Sicilian coast. I say towards because for years, the majority of boats used by the terrible Libyan criminal organization or built in the region of Sfax in Tunisia were not even able to reach Lampedusa safely, as they were overloaded with men, women, and children. Over the last 20 years, I have seen the crews change. Initially, the boats were led by sailors paid to do so, often Tunisian or Egyptian. Among the best sailors in the Mediterranean and great experts of these waters. Gradually, criminal organizations have used the migrants themselves, sometimes training them on how to navigate in just a couple of days, often sub-Saharan boys who had never seen the sea in their lives. Over the last 20 years, I have seen the condition of the migrants on board change. In 2010, I investigated an Egyptian criminal organization that had transported 104 Egyptian citizens on a large boat, managing to land them in Sicily with the collaboration of several Italian citizens paid by the organization. The migrants, once they reached the land at night, were transported by minibuses in a house in the countryside, a Sicilian countryside, where they were offered clean clothes, food, and train ticket to northern Italy or to other European states. In that case, The migrants paid half of the ticket before departure in Alexandria, in Egypt, and the other half in Sicily once safely arrived. In this way, the criminal organization bore the economic risk of the successful crossing. If the boat had sunk, the criminal organization would have lost half of its earnings. This is no longer the case. Everything changed after the end of the first Libyan civil war, which essentially ended with the killing of Muammar Gaddafi in October 2011. Since then, the terrible Libyan militias have increasingly gained ground, realizing that irregular migration to Europe could be a huge criminal business, second only to the smuggling of Libyan or Russian oil, as it today. The Libyans changed the rule of the games, created a big departure hub in Zuara in northwest Libya. After has been created, gradually other trafficking organizations developed in other cities, Sabrata, Zawiya, to name just a few. Sea crossing, which in themselves have a high margin of risk, become extremely dangerous for migrants. The Libyans began using former fishing boats in very poor condition, recovered around North Africa. They removed all the fishing equipment and created a new deck inside the hold. The spaces where fish or nets were previously stored were filled with migrants. They drilled holes in the hulls to allow people below deck to breathe, but water entered through these holes during navigation. Fishing boats created to navigate with a crew of 20 people were loaded beyond all imagination. At sea, they were unmanageable. On board, people died suffocated for lack of air, burned alive if they had the misfortune of being too close to the diesel engines, drowned in a few centimeters of water at the bottom of the ship if they had the misfortune to slip and be trampled by other migrants who, in the dark, in the hold, crushed against each other, did not notice anything. From that moment on, the number of deaths at sea along the central Mediterranean route grew until it became the most dangerous migratory route in the world. How many deaths are there at sea in the central Mediterranean? We don't know. We can count the dead bodies found at sea or on the beach, but not the number of deaths. It is not even possible to estimate the deaths at sea. Give me you two examples. In May 2016, I dealt with the investigation of 4 traffickers who transported 720 migrants on a fishing boat which had departed from Sabrata in Libya. The fishing boat, while sailing in international water just 14 miles from the Libyan coast, was spotted by an Italian Navy ship. The weather conditions were optimal, you see. The migrants on board were happy. They were about to be rescued by the Italians. At that time, this happened often, just at that time. They all moved to one side of the boat, and consequently the boat increased its roll until it capsized, and the migrants sidling fell into the water. All the migrants who were on the deck, on the open upper deck, were saved, except for 5. Their bodies were recovered by the Italian authorities along with the survivors. The boat took 40 minutes to sink upside down, an eternity. Our military personnel were heroic, saving more than 400 migrants. Only some hours later, we discovered that there were 283 migrants inside the hold, crammed into the lower deck built illegally. We know the exact number thanks to the account of a Syrian migrant who was sitting in the front of the boat when the Libyans counted the migrants they were loading on board. We have to load more goats, they said. Goats, not people. All the 283 migrants that were in the hold died, drowned inside the fishing boat. Their bodies are still somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea. According to the statistics, that shipwreck caused only 5 deaths, which corresponds to the 5 bodies recovered. The 283 deaths in the hold have left no trace in any statistics, even today. A second example. In the following years, the Libyans began to use rubber boats of about 10 meters. These rubber boats were not expensive and could be crammed with almost 200 migrants on board. They were extremely dangerous. The wells of the rubber air chambers were bad. They gave away under the weight of the migrants during the crossing, and the people drowned. How many semi-sunken dinghies have I seen over the years in the middle of the sea, without shipwrecked people around? Dinghies that have never become targets of search and rescue operation. How many of these have been seen by the Italian Coast Guard or by the Navy of a European state? How many of these have been seen by the NGOs? We don't know, because they are not counted. Each of them, till it continues to float for hours or for days, is a gravestone. Each of them is a gravestone. The sign that 200 people drowned beneath it. No one knows. No one has never counted them. Often, bodies are not found, but people die. The missing migrants we can deal with are only the bodies that we find at sea, on beaches, or on rocks. And they are only a teeny fraction of the deaths in the Mediterranean. This means that there are thousands of families in the world who mourn their missing loved ones, of whom we, sitting on the European side of the Mediterranean, have no trace, no news. Regarding the dead bodies of migrants found, few are identified. Those who have documents on them, and I have seen very few in 20 years, or those who have family members or friends who survived their shipwreck and can recognize them immediately. The other bodies remain unknown. In Italy, there is no obligation to identify them during criminal investigation. It is only done if possible, because for us, a murder remains a murder even if the victim is not identified during the trial. The guilty party is convicted anyway. What we can do with the dead body of missing migrants? Photos of distinctive signs or items, photo of the face, tattoos, jewelry. But this is not always possible. The sea and the fish are ruthless. They soon render bodies unrecognizable, even after only a few days in the water. Sometimes it's not even possible to determine the sex or the original skin color. DNA sampling, it has a cost, leads to the mutilation of the body. Sometimes it's necessary to take it from the bones to obtain useful samples. Above all, it requires comparative biological samples for identification. In Lampedusa, we find dead bodies almost daily. Bodies that are often impossible to link to a specific event or shipwreck. In Lampedusa, the small cemetery on the island does not have refrigerated cells to store bodies. It does not have a mortuary to perform autopsies. It does not have an autopsy table to examine or cut the body. Therefore, our investigation protocol stipulates that scientific police always take photos of the body. DNA sampling, on the other hand, is only done when there is a probability that someone, a member of the family, will come forward, offering us comparative biological sample. In the other cases, no DNA sampling is taken. I personally requested it on very few occasions. Only on one occasion, we were able to return two bodies to their families. This happened in the investigation following the shipwreck of a small fishing boat that departed from Sfax, Tunisia, and sank 3 miles from Lampedusa in October 2019. 25 migrants died. 22 migrants were rescued by the Italian military. On that occasion, with a complex and risky operation by the Italian Coast Guard, we managed to find the fish boat under the sea at a depth of 50 meters. After several days of researching with an equipped ship, because the fishing boat had moved 300 meters under the sea from the point of the shipwreck, we returned the dead bodies of 2 very young Tunisian migrants, Rabi and Mohammed, to their mothers. The mothers had recognized them by their clothes. Looking at the underwater images taken by a robot of the Italian Coast Guard, images that went around the world's TV channels. The mothers sent their DNA taken and analyzed by the scientific Tunisian police through their diplomatic authorities. Unfortunately, we were not able to return the bodies of their sons to other mothers in the same shipwreck. Their children were among the dead of that shipwreck. The mother had been filmed by the camera near the, they had been filmed by the camera near the wreck, but the sea had taken them away before the Italian Coast Guard divers could retrieve them. I strongly believe that it is necessary to create a database of the bodies of recovered migrants, populated with photos and DNA. But who should populate the database? Who should manage it? The photos can be uploaded by the scientific police without technical problem. Who takes the DNA from the bodies? Who processes the DNA? Criminal investigation serve to reconstruct facts, to find the perpetrator of a crime, to initiate a criminal trial. The focus of criminal investigation, therefore, is entirely centered on the alleged perpetrator of a crime. In my opinion, if the database is populated only with the results of criminal investigation, we risk having few, indeed very few, DNA profiles of migrant deceased bodies. This is because the objective of my job is to find a culprit. I have to justify the money I spend on investigation, and I have time limits to conduct my investigation, all to guarantee the rights of the suspect. Therefore, in my point of view, the database should be managed by a dedicated agency, a public agency, an European agency, which should have this as its only purpose. An agency that would certainly have close contacts with the judicial police or with the European judicial authorities. An agency that should also be equipped to communicate in an emphatic way with those searching for the body, with diplomatic authorities, with NGO working in Africa, in Middle East, or in Asia, with the families of missing migrants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weller, both for the very realistic description of what these boats actually are, and the term floating coffins sums it up pretty well. And with regards to what you said to the database, this will also be part of the discussion on Roundtable 3, because the questions you asked are exactly the ones that we need to discuss. For example, who or which agency will be able to run such a database with respect to the private data, and also with respect to the time limits that the public prosecutor obviously has. All this will be discussed later, and I'm now giving the floor to Tanja Delabarthe. Tanja, please.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, and thank you very much indeed for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here with the rapporteur, two prosecutors. I work in the Paris Forensic Institute. You might wonder why Paris? Paris isn't on the coast, but I'm going to talk to you about non-identified individuals. And amongst the non-identified individuals, Paris, which is of course a capital with stations and airports, we are on a migration route. And amongst the non-identified persons who arrive in the Paris Forensic Institute, there are of course migrants. So I'm going to be talking about these deceased persons, because all non-identified persons who arrive in a forensic institute aren't all migrants, but what they have in common is one thing, and that is that for many people, they are not being looked for because they're marginalized. It's felt that if they have left, or if they're living in the street, or if they have a marginalized lifestyle, it means that no one's waiting for them. So why should we go to the trouble to try and carry out any research to identify them. So I'll talk about these anonymous individuals, but you and I could become anonymous victims because the way in which bodies are identified, very often based on biometric data or police databases. I'm not in a police database myself, so probably I wouldn't be identified, which is why it's very important to show how forensic teams are coming forward with proposals as to how we can work together with judicial authorities, prosecutors, so that everybody could have a chance of being identified. I'll give you a few figures. In Paris, we bury some 300 people anonymously per year. Between 1,000 and 3,000 people. Who are they, these non-identified persons? They're all the people I'm talking about. Within a forensic institute, of course, we have teams that are highly motivated in order to identify such persons. But as we heard yesterday, if there's no report that a person's missing, then we can't start to identify a deceased person within the institute. There's one thing that's important, it's obvious for us, and that is that the role of the family is essential. But before we can consider that, I think we need to overcome a certain number of prejudices, and the prejudices that I've just mentioned. If a person dies in the street, for example, homeless, if they're marginalised, if they have no identity documents on them, that means inevitably that they're not considered important in the eyes of society, and that means there's nobody looking for them or waiting for them. So that is something that we're working on together with judicial authorities, prosecutors. We have introduced in Paris a dedicated protocol dealing with the anonymous deceased, and that concerns some 20% of bodies arriving in the Paris Forensic Institute that have no elements enabling us to identify them. So we've put in place a protocol to avoid them being buried anonymously. Sometimes we have to do that, but our responsibility is before that stage to have looked at all the elements that would enable future identification, because a person who's missing, as Maurice has said, is a person being waited for by the family. And while waiting for the family to find an interlocutor to declare the person missing, the body might have arrived at a forensic institute and will have had to be buried. So if the report arrived when the body has already left, we, forensic teams, prosecutors, if we haven't taken on board all the elements that enable us to identify a person, then I think the report that a person's missing will arrive too late. I think amongst the things that we need to do, I think we have to hold on to documentation. Anything will enable us to identify an individual, and not only on the basis of police databases or DNA, all effects, personal effects, scars, tattoos, for example, that can speak or say something to families, but that won't necessarily be kept in a database. Identification is not just a response in terms of DNA or a fingerprint. We're talking about all the things that we can put together, working together with families on the basis of descriptions given by families that enable us to identify individuals. A lot of people live with identities that are not their proper identities, and the only people can tell us whether that is the correct identification is the family. So the involvement of the family, I think, is very important indeed. As Maurice has said, we have procedures, we have protocols, but those protocols aren't applied throughout, including in my own country, France. What the Paris Forensic Institute does isn't necessarily done elsewhere. So it's very important to appeal to our own community, the police community, prosecutors, so that we harmonise these protocols for the identification of individuals. Now, I could give you a lot of examples, but I've chosen two to share with you. That of Ishmael. Ishmael tried to join his family. He crossed a number of oceans. He didn't die at sea. He arrived in Paris. His family is in the vicinity of Paris, but Ishmael wasn't able to integrate. Now, yesterday we talked about prevention, preventing social exclusion, and social exclusion is an aggravating factor when you're a migrant. So Ismail didn't manage to integrate. He lived in the street, homeless, no fixed abode. He died and he arrived in the Forensic Institute. We had no elements enabling us to identify him. So we worked together with associations, working together with the homeless, people who live in the street, and it took some time to get the message across to the police and the prosecutors that there is a point in working together with associations that work with the homeless. So this is something that we've been able to put in place, and it works thanks to the links that we have with these associations. It's thanks to that we were able to identify Ismail. He was buried anonymously in an anonymous grave. When then we received the report that he was missing, and that's the whole problem when it comes to non-identified bodies. It's the difficulties that families face when reporting someone as missing, whether we're talking about migrant families or people who are well integrated in society in France, and I know it's the case in other European countries. If disappearance isn't considered worrying, then the family cannot trigger an investigation in order to search for the person concerned. That explains why a lot of people are buried anonymously, as Maurice was saying, without a description provided by the family, without a report. Then it's difficult to identify an individual. So I think it's important that we factor in all these elements. We as forensic teams, we know what our work is. We know that we have to work with prosecutors. We need to work with the sort of technical or scientific police, but that's not enough. I think we need to consider other ways of identifying individuals, a consolidated form of identification, and that presupposes working together with associations and hearing from families. So Ismail, we managed to identify him, and it was very important for us because even we're talking about small histories. I mean, for everybody involved, the judicial authorities, forensic teams, we're talking about a shift, a paradigm shift. We are able to identify individuals. There are lots of families waiting for people to return, migrant families or the homeless. If you use ChatGPT for non-identified bodies, what will you find? Migrants, homeless, the excluded, the marginalized. That's the answer you'll get with ChatGPT, and I think it's very revealing of the situation. Very often these people can't be identified, but I think our work shows it's not necessarily the case. So we've had some 100 sort of bodies that were non-identified. We've been able to reduce that figure to some 30, working together with associations, working together with the police, working together with prosecutors who've given us enough time to do the work necessary, awareness raising, the forensic teams, investigators, working together with associations and families. So I wanted to talk to you about Ismail, but also Valérie, a young girl who disappeared some 20 years ago. We were able to identify her. Her disappearance was worrying. Her body had not been identified. But what do Ismail and Valérie share? Valérie was French. She lived together with her parents. She was found buried less than 1 kilometre than the domicile of her parents. But Valérie, like Ismail, were people who were considered marginalised in society, or it was felt there was no possibility of identifying them. Now, together with Maurice, other colleagues, Cristina Cataneo, we wrote an article in Le Monde calling on European authorities to include in European law the obligation to identify all persons who are deceased, non-identified, who are sort of buried anonymously. So that is something that we're working on, and I submit that proposal to you today as members of Parliament and colleagues. Thank you.
Tanya, thank you so much, and also for highlighting again the obligation for identification. And I think this will definitely be one takeaway from today, that this should be a priority and that we maybe also have to think this on a larger scale. And I think it's definitely worth trying to push forward on the political level. We're now giving the floor to Panayotis Maniatis. Welcome, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Palke. Thanks for the invitation. It's an honor being here among you for this very important conference that will give us the opportunity to discuss about topics that of huge interest and try to detect common solutions from all stakeholders involved. I have prepared some kind of intervention in our roundtable regarding the involvement of Greece, of my country. As said, I'm a public prosecutor at the Court of First Instance of Athens, and my country is heavily involved in the topics we're discussing about. So the first part of the intervention shall focus on the Pylos disaster. We started discussing about it since yesterday, and we are continuing discussing about it. This makes sense because it is obviously a major incident. So let me elaborate a bit further about this. It was an incident that took place quite recently, 2023. It is the Adriana shipwreck that took place actually in June 2023 and occurred in about 47 nautical miles southwest of Pylos. By the way, Pylos is a small city located in southwestern Peloponnese. And it has been and still is one of the biggest and deadliest incidents ever occurred in the Mediterranean Sea, as it caused a vast amount of deaths at sea. Let me give you a quick overview of the facts. It was about a fishing ship named Adriana that departed from Libya on June 9th, 2023, and around 5 a.m., more precisely from a small port near Tobruk, having Italy as its final destination. Up to now, there is still some speculation about the exact number of passengers aboard. However, after the end of all investigations having taken place, up to now it is believed that the total amount of passengers exceeded 750 persons, and most probably it is believed to be in the range of 771 persons on board. In the crucial events, in the afternoon of June 13th, 2023, the ship, while sailing at around 47 nautical miles southwest of Pylos, addressed a call for help that was addressed to the Italian authorities at first place. Shortly after, the Italian authorities informed the Greek Coast Guard accordingly, and while Adriana was still located at the high seas, 47 nautical miles, while the Greek territorial waters do not exceed 12 nautical miles, at the time the Greek Coast Guard informed alongside sailing vessels about the ongoing incident, and at the same time a Coast Guard helicopter took off so that to give the exact position of the ship. Shortly after, a Maltese-flagged vessel approached Adriana and provided supplies to its passengers, while a couple of hours later, a Greek-flagged merchant vessel approached Adriana anew and invited its passengers to board. However, all of them denied. They were reluctant to board a Greek-flagged vessel and thus to be located on Greek soil, as their purpose was to reach their final destination, which was Italy. The final tragic outcome was that at around 2 a.m. of June 14th, 2023, the ship capsized and finally sank. When it comes to human casualties, at first there were 95 persons who were rescued. Their nationalities: 47 Syrian nationals, 34 Egyptians, 12 Pakistanis, and 2 Palestinians. Another 82 persons were found dead, and all the others are still declared missing. A total amount of 585 persons are believed to be missing, of which 184 Egyptians, 297 Pakistanis, 99 Syrians, 4 Indians, and 1 Afghan. The majority of all those missing persons are believed to be young men. The judicial dimension of the case, as said, the Hellenic Coast Guard launched also almost immediately an investigation. So they managed to identify 9 persons, all of them Egyptian nationals, who were among the 95 rescued persons. And those 9 individuals were believed to be the organizers of the trip aboard. They have been arrested and further prosecuted. Further on, according to the internal procedural regulation, the judicial investigation phase followed, and finally all 9 perpetrators were cited to trial for a total of 4 counts. The indictment against them suggested that they were accused of first setting up and functioning an international criminal group, which is a felony, facilitation of illegal immigration, another felony, causing of shipwreck, felony, and final, 4th, the illegal entrance to the country, which was a misdemeanor. The trial took place finally in June 24, and finally it was found that their crimes have been committed in international waters, namely outside the Greek soil and Greek territorial waters, where no universal jurisdiction could be in appliance, and in addition, Greek criminal laws could not be in appliance. Finally, for the 2 counts, the prosecution has been declared inadmissible, and for the other 2, they have been acquitted for those grounds. Regarding the human casualties, once again, let me highlight the role of Greek DVI team, which was crucial and very important, the disaster victim identification team, with very significant results, as we will see. So members of the team went on board, on site, almost immediately to support the operations. At first phase, they recovered the bodies, and their first actions was to tagging and photography on board, dactyloscopy, and taking of fingerprints. All those acts have taken place at the port. An interview phase of survivors followed, so that to collect any ante-mortem data on the spot, while at the same time a team of psychological support was established to provide its services to survivors. At the same time, a call center was set up on the spot, and which was functional from June 16th till the end of September 2023, and through this call center, all communications with the relatives of the missing persons have taken place. The communication was not easy and had to be made to the languages necessary on each occasion. All those languages were English, Arabic, Pashtun, Urdu, Farsi, French, Turkish, and this has been made with the help of interpreters. All these facilities, the call center and the services of interpreters were provided by the Ministry of Migration and Asylum, whose role was crucial for the whole operation. DNA samples were collected from relatives of the missing persons, who were also interviewed in person, and psychological support was equally provided. The methodology that followed so that to gather the necessary information to lead us to the identification of victims had several layers of cooperation. First of all, cooperation with the involved embassies, namely the embassies of the countries survivors and victims were originating from, or they were residents. And those countries were Egypt, Pakistan, Syria, Jordan, and India. Secondly, direct and bilateral cooperation with national and international organizations and NGOs such as Interpol, Red Cross, Red Descent Community, the International Committee of Missing Persons. Cooperation with various national stakeholders involved, such as the Coroner's Office, the General Secretary of Civil Protection, Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs was the official channel of communication with the countries involved, which provided the latter with official statements informing them about specific aspects of the procedure that were taking place. Communication and cooperation with other national DVA teams with EU countries was proved to be very successful and very helpful too. And there has been also cooperation, direct cooperation with the embassies of the involved countries due to direct communication about issues and discrepancies which occurred during the process. The final outcome was quite significant, as out of 82 persons who were found dead bodies, finally 74 of them were fully identified. Another 2 are almost fully identified, and for the rest there is still some missing information. I believe that in the near future the outcome will be also positive for those persons too. Regarding another aspect I would like to touch upon is about effective investigation that is taking place on behalf of national authorities regarding our thematic and the cases we're touching upon. I would like to stress out that since 2020, by means of a specific law number 4662 of the year 2020, the Greek Ombudsman has been mandated to review internal investigations of arbitrariness by law enforcement personnel. So ever since, the Greek Ombudsman is the competent national authority to oversee the processing of complaints on the actions of uniformed personnel, such as Hellenic Police, Hellenic Coast Guard, Fire Brigade, the personnel of penitentiary facilities, and so on. In addition, the Greek Ombudsman is also authorized to carry out its own investigation in parallel to or in absence of an internal disciplinary investigation. One final aspect is about 2 circulars that have been issued by the General Prosecutor's Office. More particularly, these are the circulars number 6 of the year 2020 and 1 of the year 2023, and these circulars that have been addressed to all PPOs throughout the country suggest that preliminary investigations when it comes to complaints or cases having to do with all sorts of ill treatment, identification of perpetrators, and all relative questions, so investigation should be carried out by prosecutors, first instance court prosecutors, and not anymore by police officers, so that to give an additional guarantee for an effective, in-depth, and reliable investigation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Mr. Maniatis, thank you so much. In particular, as a public prosecutor, you were asking for more work because, as you said, the investigation should be carried out by prosecutors, and this is something we do not hear too often. But thank you very much, in particular, for this perspective, and also for outlining a bit how the Greek government was handling this case, in particular with this very special person, the Greek Ombudsman, who plays a great role, not just in the Greek system, but in particular for the Pilos incident, and he was keeping a close eye on this, and I think this was a very effective operation that was carried out for this incident. Thank you very much.